Welcome to today's video. I'm Richard Chapo. I'm an internet lawyer in San Diego, California. So today we're taking a look at the California Consumer Privacy Act consumer definition. And the California Consumer Privacy Act is a new privacy law in California, obviously, going into effect January 1st, 2020. It's also known as the CCPA. So when we have a new privacy law of this sort, it's important to understand who it applies to. Most people assume every law applies to everybody, and that's just not the case, particularly when we're talking about state laws. So in this case, CCPA applies to consumers. Now, if I said to you, what's a consumer? You would probably tell me, oh, it's somebody comes to my website or app and they make a purchase, or they're thinking about making a purchase, or maybe they join my membership site, or something where there's some kind of a potential financial transaction happening. And you would be correct. Now, the CCPA actually defines it a bit differently, the phrase consumer, and there are two reasons. One, they're jurisdictional issues. These are technical legal issues you probably really don't want to know about, so I won't bore you to death, but they restrict the definition in some ways. The second reason is the California legislature likes to make a meal out of things like this, and so they make it far more complicated than it needs to be. Now, before we get into it, let me just mention, if you are in a state other than California and you have a website or an app, you're running it, let's say you're in, Iowa, Texas, Florida, wherever, it's important to understand that the CCPA is applicable if you collect information from people in California. It doesn't matter where you're located. So if you're in one of those other states, you may still need to comply. Now, there's a certain threshold test you have to go. You can contact me to learn more. It's something that you'll have to go through. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter if you're in another state. The law can still apply to you. Now, you might be thinking, if the lawsuits and the penalties are issued in California, what do I care if I'm in another state? And that's because it's very easy to essentially have those penalties or those lawsuit judgments enforced in any state in the U.S. It's through a concept called a sister state judgment. Very easy to do. So, you can't use the GDPR theory that I've heard people talk about where they say, oh, well, how are the Europeans ever going to come over here and enforce, these judgments or these fines in the U.S. against me if I don't have any locations in Europe? Or my money's not in Europe, or those kinds of things. And I understand the argument, and it'll be interesting to see how that whole process plays out. But when it comes to state laws in the United States, any state laws, they're very easy to enforce in the other states. So don't think that that's a defense. If you're collecting information from people in California, you need to be aware of this. So CCPA applies to consumers. What is the definition for consumer? And we can see it right there in the number one. Consumer means a natural person who's a California resident. It's defined in Section 17014 of Title 18 of the California Code of Regulations, and that section read on September 1st, 2017, however identified, including by any unique identifier. So as I said, the California legislature likes to make a meal out of these things. Now, realistically, it's only the first little section there that is the most important, and that is consumer means a natural person who is a California resident. So the CCPA is going to grant consumers a lot of different rights that they can exercise. And so, for instance, they can ask you as the website or app owner to identify all the information you've collected about them, the personal information, and to actually produce it. So you're going to have to give them copies of that information. Okay. There's another right, for instance, the right of deletion. So they can say, hey, I know you have certain personal information about me. I want you to delete it. And you're going to have to do that. And you're also going to have to contact your vendors who have access to that personal information, and they're going to have to delete it. So we've moved well beyond the old days where you just slapped up a privacy policy on your site and forgot about it. Now this is going to be much more interactive. Now, the important thing to understand, and the reason why the definition of consumer is important is because it means a natural person who is a California resident. So technically that means that when requests come in, if they're coming in from somebody who's not in California, you don't have to comply. So let's say you have a site, e-commerce site, you're selling wedding accessories, and you sell them all over the country. You get, two requests from people who live in California. Well, you have to comply with those. You then get a request from somebody in New York. Do you have to comply? And the technical legal answer is no, because again, the consumer definition is a person who is a California resident. Since the person in New York is not a California resident, technically you can tell them to pound sand. Now, there's a non-legal issue that you need to think about here, and that is the practical ramifications of telling people that you're only going to grant these rights to people who are in California, because that could it could anger other people in other states. And what might they do? What might that person in New York do? Might they go on Yelp and leave a negative review for you? Might they start posting on social media about what a jerk you are because, this brand is not, giving the same rights to people outside of California that they do to people in California? If you were in really, really, really bad luck, might journalists get interested and suddenly you're on the news or being written up on news sites. You can see how the boulder could start rolling downhill here pretty quickly. And once that happens, it's very difficult to stop. So you need to think about, are you going to grant the rights that are available under the CCPA to everybody who comes to your site? Or are you just going to stick with California residents? Now, there is no technical legal answer to that. This is a practical policy issue that you, as the owner or manager of an online property, are going to have to think about and come up with an answer. In some cases, restricting it to California individuals, may be fine. If your site is offering California mortgages to consumers, well, the vast majority of your audience are going to be people in California. And so you don't really care about people outside of the state. Now, yes, I realize people can be flying into the state and buying homes and they need a mortgage. But generally speaking, your audience is going to be primarily in California. If we go back to the wedding accessory idea, your audience is going to be everywhere. Any e-commerce store, your audience is going to be everywhere. So you're going to need to think about, how do you want to express these rights? And that's something you should probably also talk to your lawyer about too, because you want to make sure that, there are no legal ramifications. If you don't have a lawyer, make sure you talk to one. Compliance with the CCPA is not something you can buy a form for. It's much more complicated than that, and the penalties are pretty dire. So make sure you speak to somebody. If you're in California, you can always reach out to me. I'm at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. But make sure you take care of that. Now, you might be wondering, okay, wait, what about the rest of that definition as defined in Section 17014 of the Title 18 of the California Code of Regulations? And so I've included it below there. It says the term resident, as defined in the law, includes one, every individual who is in the state for other than a temporary or transitory purpose, and two, every individual who's domiciled in the state who's outside of the state for a temporary transitory purpose. All of the individuals are non-residents. Do you need to worry about this? Probably not. I mean, this is really what I call a law school phrase or a law school clause. If you were in law school, the professor would raise this kind of a clause, and then you would have a debate over different scenarios as to what is and is not a temporary or transitory purpose. So you might spend a day saying, okay, well, John lives and works in LA and, he goes to Phoenix for the weekend for 3 days to play golf. Is that a temporary or transitory purpose? And most people in the class would argue it's a temporary purpose and, therefore the law still applies. And then the professor would say, okay, John meets somebody while he's playing golf and he actually ends up staying in Phoenix for another 3 months. And he doesn't come back to California during that period. Is it a transitory or temporary purpose? And you would have this big debate. Now, back in the real world, unless you have a large employee group that is all over the country, or you have a massive audience that might be moving around a lot, you really don't need to worry about that much, in my opinion. I would really focus more on consumer means a natural person who is a California resident. That's really going to be kind of the definition you want to focus on. So anyways, if you have questions or comments on any of this, you can reach me at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. You can also post down below in the comment section, although please don't post anything confidential or sensitive because it's a public forum. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If not, I feel shame. Give me a thumbs down. We have a playlist on our page on YouTube for the Law Office of Richard Chapo, and it is devoted to the CCPA. There are numerous videos there covering different CCPA topics. So if you have questions, you may be able to find answers there. And we'll be posting more CCPA videos throughout the rest of the year. So you can always subscribe to this channel to get more information when it comes out. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have yourself a good one.